He was gasping for breath in the quiet luxury of first class, and the woman who knelt beside him didn't know she had just stepped into the most dangerous chapter of her life. Ozioma's hands trembled, not from fear, but from instinct, the kind that never fades even after years of walking away from the white walls of a medical school she could no longer afford. Once, she had dreamed of saving lives in hospitals. Now, she floated between skies as a flight attendant, serving strangers with polite smiles that hid forgotten ambitions. But fate has a cruel way of circling back, like a storm that waits for calm before it strikes. Bogum, the passenger who collapsed, was no ordinary man. Beneath his tailored suit, power slept like a loaded gun. His name carried silence and fear through the underworld of Seoul. No one dared to touch him, but now he was dying, and only Ozioma had the courage to bring him back. She pressed down on his chest, counting in her mind, steady and desperate. The world around her blurred, the hum of the engines, the gasps of passengers, the sharp scent of iron in the air. And when his breath returned, faint but real, she whispered a thank you to a god she no longer prayed to as often as she should. When the plane landed, she expected flashing ambulance lights and sirens. Instead, there was only silence and shadows. Men in black suits were already waiting, their faces carved from stone. They moved like ghosts, wordless and swift, surrounding the stretcher before the airport staff could even react. There were no questions, no hesitation, only command. Then one of them turned toward her. Ozioma's heart stopped. They weren't there to thank her. To them, she wasn't a hero. She was a variable, an unknown, and in their world, unknowns were dangerous. Before she could explain, their hands were on her, cold, firm, unforgiving. A cloth covered her mouth, and the world tilted sideways as the night swallowed her whole. When she woke, the air was colder, thicker. The smell of antiseptic and polished marble filled her lungs. She was in a place that wasn't meant for outsiders, a fortress, hidden beyond city lights, built from power, fear, and secrecy. Beyond the door, voices murmured low, commanding, foreign. The language of loyalty and blood. Bogum lay motionless in the next room, connected to tubes and surrounded by private doctors. His heartbeat was steady but distant, his body trapped between life and death. The men who brought her here watched her every move. They didn't trust hospitals. They trusted no one. To them, she was both the only witness and the first suspect. Days blurred into nights. Ozioma tried to reason, tried to explain, but no one listened. Instead, she was kept close, forced to stay in the same mansion where the man she saved drifted in and out of a coma. And somehow, despite her fear, she couldn't leave his side. There was something in his stillness that drew her, something broken beneath the perfection of his face. Each night, she found herself sitting beside him, whispering prayers she thought she'd forgotten, words that carried warmth into the cold room. He never answered, but sometimes his fingers twitched. And though he was trapped in darkness, somewhere, deep inside, Bogum heard her voice. It cut through the silence of his unconsciousness like sunlight through fog. A voice soft enough to calm his storms, yet strong enough to pull him back from the edge. He didn't know her name, but in that shadowed world between life and death, he felt her presence, an angel of mercy in a world that never believed in angels. And so, Ozioma waited, day after day, night after night, not out of duty, but from something she couldn't yet name. And in that mansion, where danger slept behind every locked door, the seed of something forbidden began to grow, between fear and fate, between the living and the barely alive. It began with mercy.
But mercy has a way of turning into something far more dangerous. Before she ever stepped foot on an airplane, Ozioma had learned what it meant to fall. Born in Nigeria, in a small town where dreams were often exchanged for survival, she grew up believing that kindness was a form of strength. Her parents had raised her with love, quiet, steady love that whispered, "You can be more." And for a while, she believed them. She was the bright one, the girl everyone said would make it, the one who studied late into the night, her eyes glowing with ambition, her hands always trembling with hope. She got into medical school, the pride of her family. For 4 years, she wore her white coat like armor, healing strangers, helping patients, and dreaming of one day saving lives on a scale her small world could never imagine. But dreams have a price. And when her father fell ill and the bills came faster than miracles, her life unraveled quietly. At first, she tried to manage both, lectures by day, side jobs at night. But as the debt deepened and her mother's voice grew more tired over the phone, she knew she had to choose. So, she did what no one expected. She dropped out, 1 year short of becoming a doctor. Her classmates called it a tragedy. Her family called it a sacrifice. And Ozioma simply called it reality. She took any job she could find, waitressing, tutoring, even cleaning hotel rooms in the city. But no matter how hard she worked, her paychecks never caught up with her pain. Until one evening, in the break room of a small restaurant, her best friend, a stewardess with wings on her uniform and stories in her eyes, leaned over and said, "Why don't you try aviation school? You have the grace for it, and they're offering scholarships." At first, Ozioma laughed. Her? In the skies? She had never even been on a plane. But destiny has a strange sense of humor. She applied with trembling hands and zero expectations. And when the acceptance letter arrived, she cried for the first time in years. It was a full scholarship, a new beginning. For the next 12 months, she gave herself to the skies. She learned safety drills, evacuation codes, and international etiquette. But what set her apart wasn't just her intelligence, it was her ability to connect, to listen, to care. Her bilingual gift made her shine even brighter. She had learned Korean during her medical school days, not in a classroom, but through endless hours of Kdramas, YouTube clips, and her Duolingo streak that had crossed 400 days. What began as a fangirl obsession became her secret weapon. When she graduated from Aviation Academy, she was fluent enough to surprise even native speakers. And that's how she landed her dream posting, an international flight attendant stationed at Incheon International Airport, one of the busiest airports in the world. It was her first day, a day she would remember forever. The air was crisped, filled with the hum of engines and the scent of brewed coffee and expensive perfume. Her uniform fit perfectly. Her badge gleamed under the morning sun. For the first time in a long time, she felt free. She didn't know that destiny had boarded her flight too. She didn't know that in just a few hours, a man would collapse before her, a man whose heartbeat she would restart, whose life she would unknowingly save, and whose love would drag her into a world where innocence and danger danced on the same blade.
Welcome to Mafia Love Story, where passion meets the power. If you crave steamy romance mixed with intense crime thriller drama, you're in the right place. Ready to get hooked on your next obsession? Don't forget to like this story, subscribe for the next chapter, and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Let's get dangerous.
The mansion never slept. Even in silence, it breathed the faint hum of security cameras, the echo of footsteps on marble floors, the distant whisper of men guarding secrets too heavy for daylight. And in one secluded room, life lingered between two heartbeats. Kang Bogum lay still, a storm trapped in human form. Machines breathed for him, their rhythmic beeps the only proof that power could bleed,
that gods could fall. Beside him, Ozioma sat in quiet rebellion against fear. At first, she stayed because she had no choice. His men had made it clear she wasn't going anywhere until their boss woke up. They watched her with suspicion, followed her with eyes that said, "One wrong move and you'll disappear." But over time, the fear faded into something else, something softer, something dangerous. She began to notice the small things, the faint crease between his brows, as though even in sleep he carried the weight of an empire. The scar along his neck, thin but deep, a whisper of violence. The way his hand occasionally twitched when her voice broke the silence. Every evening, when the sun melted into the horizon and shadows claimed the mansion, she would sit beside him. Sometimes she read to him from the old flight safety manuals she kept, or from prayer books she found in a forgotten drawer. Other nights, she simply spoke about her childhood in Nigeria, her dreams of becoming a doctor, her mother's laughter, her father's silence when the bills came. And though his eyes never opened, something in the air changed. It was as if the walls listened, as if his pulse echoed her words. In his coma, Bogum drifted through memories that weren't his own. Voices surrounded him, distant, soft, foreign. Among them, one stood out. A woman's voice, gentle, unwavering. She spoke of skies and lost dreams, of kindness in a cruel world. Her voice painted warmth into the cold corridors of his mind. Who was she? Why did her words feel like light seeping into the darkness he'd built around his soul? In his dreams, he reached out for her, but every time he did, she vanished, leaving only the echo of her name on his lips. Ozioma. She didn't know he could hear her. She didn't know that every prayer, every word she whispered, was stitching itself into the fabric of his survival. Weeks passed, then a month. And in that month, something inside Ozioma changed too. She no longer saw him as just a stranger or a threat. She saw a man haunted by invisible wars, a man whose strength had cost him peace. Some nights, she wondered why she cared, why her heart raced when the monitors beeped irregularly, why she prayed harder for his life than she ever did for her own. Was it compassion or something deeper, darker, unspoken? One night, as rain whispered against the glass, she placed her hand over his. It was warm now, not cold as before. "Wake up," she murmured under her breath, though no one could hear. "Just wake up." The next morning, the air felt different. The doctors moved faster, checking monitors, whispering in Korean. His pulse had changed, steady, strong, determined. And when Ozioma entered the room, his fingers twitched again. But this time, they didn't stop. They curled slowly around hers. Her breath caught. The doctors froze. Then, his eyes opened. Dark, piercing, unreadable. For a moment, the world stood still. He looked at her, confusion flickering into something deeper, as though his soul recognized her before his mind did. The girl who had saved him, the girl whose voice had followed him through the darkness was real. Standing there, trembling under his gaze, both terrified and drawn in. And though neither spoke a word, the silence between them said everything. In that moment, something ancient and dangerous sparked to life. The storm had opened its eyes, and mercy had turned into obsession.
When Kung Bogum opened his eyes, the world did not return gently. It came back in fragments, blinding light, muffled voices, and the distant rhythm of rain. His body ached as if 1,000 battles had been fought inside him. But one thing cut through the haze, the woman standing at his bedside. Ozioma. Her face was calm, but her eyes carried too many storms. He didn't know her. Not by name, not by caste, and yet he felt as if he had been searching for her all his life. For days he said nothing. He only watched her from the edge of his healing silence, studying the curve of her face when she prayed, the gentleness of her hands when she adjusted his blanket, the way her fear never fully left her eyes, even when she tried to hide it. He should have dismissed her. He should have sent her away like every other witness to his weakness. But something in him refused. Instead, he kept her close. The mansion became her prison and her sanctuary all at once. Men in suits patrolled the halls, their silence sharp, their loyalty unshaken. Bogum's empire waited for his command, but his focus lingered on the stranger who had stolen his breath long before his heart remembered how to beat. Ozioma didn't understand why she was still there. Every morning she expected someone to tell her she was free to go. But every time she asked, the same answer came. Quiet, final, cold. The boss isn't ready yet. Ready for what? She didn't know. Sometimes she found him sitting by the window, watching the garden in silence. The scar on his neck caught the sunlight, reminding her how close he'd come to death. There was something magnetic about his stillness, a kind of quiet that made the air heavy. She told herself to look away, but his silence pulled her closer than words ever could. Each day she saw more of him, not the legend whispered about in fear, but the man behind it. A man who hid his pain behind perfect control. A man who didn't know how to thank someone for saving his life, so he offered her protection instead. Protection that felt a little too much like possession. One evening, the mansion's lights flickered. Outside, thunder rolled across the Seoul skyline. Bogum stood on the balcony, the city stretching below like a kingdom of shadows. When Ozioma stepped out to check on him, he turned. Slow, deliberate. In that instant, she saw it. The look that made her heart stop, the unspoken recognition that she wasn't just his savior, she had become his weakness. And weakness, in his world, was unforgivable. Still, she couldn't move. His gaze held her there. Soft, dangerous, unrelenting. Days passed, and their worlds began to tangle. His men obeyed her words without question now. She didn't notice when fear turned into quiet authority. He began to rely on her presence for calm, for focus, for reasons he couldn't name. But in the shadows of the mansion, envy was growing. There were whispers among his men that the foreign girl had bewitched their boss, that she was a spy sent to finish what fate had started. And among those whispers, one voice was louder than the rest. His sister, Gohara, not by blood, but something deeper. The woman who had ruled the empire in Bogum's absence, the one who didn't want her king to wait. That night, as Ozioma walked through the marble corridors, she felt eyes following her, unseen, predatory. The mansion that had once felt merely cold now felt alive, watching. Something was coming. She could feel it in the way the guards stopped talking when she entered the room, in the way Bogum's cone hardened when his men reported back. Power shifted quietly in the air, like a blade being drawn in the dark. And through it all, Bogum watched her with that same unreadable gaze, torn between gratitude and desire, protection and danger. He had built his empire on control, on never needing anyone. But now, every breath she took threatened to unravel him. In the stillness of night, when he closed his eyes, he could still hear her voice from the days he lay between life and death. That voice haunted him, gentle, pure, forbidden. It wasn't supposed to mean anything, but it did. More than anything ever had. And in a world where love was weakness, Kung Bogum was slowly falling. He just didn't know that somewhere within his fortress
someone was waiting for the perfect moment to make him pay for it. Gohara and Bogum were not bound by blood, but by something far stronger: survival. They met as children in the small, decaying orphanage on the outskirts of Busan, a place where dreams went to die quietly. Hara had been abandoned at age 6, her memories fractured and fading. Bogum was only 8, already carrying the eyes of someone twice his age. He was the boy who shared his stolen bread with her, who fought off bullies twice his size to protect her. In that cruel world, they became each other's only family. And for a long time, that was enough. But the world outside the orphanage was worse. At 12 and 14, they were taken in by a foster family, a man and woman who wore smiles in public, but carried cruelty in their fists. The foster father used them for labor, his punishments sharp and inventive. Hara remembered nights of muffled screams, of broken glass and bloodied palms as Bogum shielded her from beatings meant for both of them. It was in that fire that their bond was forged, unbreakable, or so it seemed. Years later, when Bogum escaped and returned for her, they burned that house to the ground. That was the night they stopped being children. That was the night the world learned that the orphans from Busan had no fear left to lose. Together, they built an empire. Gohara became his shadow, the strategist, the cold voice behind the throne. While Bogum handled the blood and steel of the cartel, Hara handled its secrets, its money, its invisible strings. They ruled the underworld like twin storms, loyal, unstoppable, unchallenged. But power changes people, and greed changes everything. When Bogum began expanding their operations into Europe, he refused to deal in weapons or certain narcotics. No trade that poisons children, he said. To him, there were still lines not meant to be crossed. But Hara saw it differently. She had lived too long in hunger, too long in fear to let morality dictate profit. The new trade routes she proposed could triple their wealth, open territories that even the Yakuza feared to touch. When Bogum refused, she smiled. But her silence was not peace, it was the sound of venom brewing. She began poisoning him slowly, not the kind that could be traced, but the kind that crippled him from the inside. Each dose calculated, each symptom subtle. Fatigue, nausea, a faint pain in his chest. No one suspected her. After all, she was the devoted sister who never left his side. Until the day of his flight to Seoul, when the final dose took hold. The cardiac arrest at 30,000 feet wasn't fate, it was her doing. And when the black girl Ozioma revived him, unknowingly undoing weeks of her careful plan, Gohara's wrath turned toward her. To Hara, Ozioma wasn't a hero, she was an intruder, a stranger who had saved the wrong man. Now Hara watches from the shadows again, the same way she once did as a child, but colder, sharper, crueler. Her brother's empire is hers by design, and no one, not even the woman who brought him back from death, will stand in her way. Because in her mind, she isn't the villain. She's the survivor who finally learned that love is weakness, and survival is the only family that never betrays you.
The mansion stood in uneasy silence, its halls colder than ever. Something invisible hung in the air, not peace, not calm, but the pause before chaos. For weeks, Kang Bogum's world had begun to tremble beneath its own weight. Since the day he opened his eyes and found Ozioma beside him, everything had shifted. His empire, once built on fear, now carried a heartbeat. Her heartbeat. And though he tried to hide it, his men saw it. They saw the way his eyes followed her, how his voice softened when he spoke her name. To them, it was a weakness. To him, it was the only thing that still felt real.
But love in a world of power is never left unpunished. The whispers grew teeth, and one night, the storm finally broke. It began with the sound of rain, soft, deceptive. Ozioma was in the library, her reflection flickering in the glass as thunder rolled beyond the hills. She had grown used to the quiet rhythm of her captivity, though she never called it that aloud. She told herself she was still a guest, that when he was ready, he would let her go. But deep down, she already knew the truth. She was free to leave, but her heart wasn't. A sudden crack shattered the stillness. Not thunder, gunfire. The room exploded into chaos. Shouts in Korean, footsteps pounding down the hall. The mansion, once untouchable, had been breached. Before she could move, the door burst open. A familiar face stepped in, one of Bogum's trusted lieutenants. His suit was soaked, his eyes sharp with something darker than loyalty. He didn't come to protect her. Outside, the war for power had begun. Inside, the real battle was already waiting. In another wing of the mansion, Bogum fought to regain control. His empire was turning against him, betrayed from within. Men he had raised now pointed guns in his direction, fueled by greed, by fear, by the promise of a world without him. But even as blood stained the marble floors, his thoughts went to one thing: her. Ozioma. He had survived bullets, knives, and betrayal before. But the thought of losing her, the woman who had pulled him from death, the one soul who looked at him without fear, that was the wound he couldn't bear. He fought his way through his own men, eyes blazing, heart pounding. When he reached the library, the sight that met him froze his breath. Gohara's hand gripping Ozioma's arm, a gun pressed to her side. For the first time, the calm, calculated king of the underworld lost his composure. The world around him blurred. There was only her. Gohara's voice was low, mocking, a serpent's whisper. Bogum stepped forward, every muscle poised, every breath laced with fury. The next sound came too fast to process. A single gunshot that cut through the storm. Silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, Ozioma fell. He caught her before she hit the ground, his hands trembling for the first time in years. Her blood was warm against his skin, too warm, too real. Her lips moved, but no words came. Something inside him broke. Something beyond rage, beyond power. Gohara was dead before her body even hit the floor. Bogum didn't remember pulling the trigger. He only remembered the sound of losing everything he didn't know he needed. Rain poured harder now, running down the broken windows, washing away the traces of empire and vengeance. But then, a heartbeat. Faint. Fragile. She was alive. Barely, but alive. He lifted her, shouting for the doctors, for anyone who could stop the world from ending in his arms. Hours blurred into eternity. The doctors worked behind closed doors while he stood outside drenched in rain and guilt. For the first time in his life, power meant nothing. When the doors finally opened, their eyes didn't give him an answer. They only told him what he already knew, that fate was still deciding. He walked into the room. She lay there, pale, motionless, between life and death, just as he had been when she found him. The circle had closed. He sat beside her, his hand over hers, whispering her name like a prayer. And somewhere in that quiet space between despair and devotion, he realized the only person who had ever truly owned him was the woman he could still lose. Her fingers twitched. Once. Then stillness again. He looked up, eyes hollow, breath caught in eternity. Outside, lightning flashed, illuminating the walls of his empire. An empire built on blood, now trembling on the edge of collapse. The doctor stepped back, uncertain. Bogum leaned closer, his voice barely a whisper. "You brought me back from death. Now come back to me." He breathed into the silence. The monitor flickered once, twice, then a heartbeat. Slow, steady, defiant. She was alive. Tears streaming down his eyes, he realized he couldn't lose her. Not now. Not ever. She was the love of his life. Ozioma, the black girl he was obsessed with. In a world ruled by greed and power, she proved that compassion could still be a weapon, and love the only kind of redemption left.